Minnesota has seen the anger and frustration of deadly police encounters firsthand, especially with the death of George Floyd last year. Over the past 12 months or so, plenty has been talked about regarding recommendations on reducing deadly force issues. And now a $3 million grant from the Pollad Family Foundation is being given to one group specifically working on this with law enforcement.
This is an opportunity for the foundation to help move recommendations into implementation, specifically at the municipal and county levels.
Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison was part of a roundtable today with members of the Working Group on Police-Involved Deadly Force Encounters. Keith, members spoke on recommendations that they've come up with over the past year. What are some of those recommendations?
Well, they have recommendations regarding officer training, officer wellness, community counselors who can engage to deal with trauma and grief, recommendations about a joint jurisdiction in terms of responding to calls where an individual could be in a mental health crisis. We have a whole range of recommendations, and out of the 18 that we proposed, 11 have been taken up and passed into law by the legislature. There's still more that could be done, and we had a number of legislative members who are busy and thinking about what more they could do. But at the end of the day, it's not about law, it's about community.
Yeah.
And we need community and law enforcement to sit down, to talk, to come to a better understanding so that we can be safer and we can make sure that people's rights are respected.
They're getting $3 million from the Pollad Foundation, as I mentioned. Did they say today where that money is going to be spent specifically?
Yeah, it's going to be spent on improving police-community relations. It's going to be spent on making sure that the relationship between people and the police departments that protect them is more wholesome, more respecting of civil rights, and has better outcomes.
There is no doubt that when we saw that video of Derek Chauvin last year and his knee on George Floyd's neck, that it was disturbing on so many different levels. But what about, and so much has come out in the past year with improving relations but there's also been a lot of negativity toward our law enforcement. So I wanted to ask you about this. What about folks who say that there's not enough focus on criminals who fight law enforcement or who resist arrest in some instances?
Well, I mean, that's a problem too. We have to deal with all of the problems. We can't just limit our attention to one aspect. I mean, let me tell you, that's one of the great things about our working group is that we had a number of members of law enforcement, both urban, suburban, and rural, who talked about the challenges that they face. In fact, we had some people who were family members of law enforcement who came in and talked about their losses, officers who've been killed in the line of duty. So our working group is not trying to fix blame, we're trying to fix a problem. And we agree that no matter what the deal is, it's better for everybody to have fewer deadly force encounters with police.
Continuing now with my conversation from this afternoon with Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison. Before the break, we were talking about the group that's sole purpose right now in the Twin Cities is to ease deadly encounters with law enforcement. But what about rural or greater Minnesota law enforcement and supporting them? Over the last year, I've had a lot of conversations and interviews about deadly force, about the training for police officers. I've talked to law enforcement. I've talked to community members in the African American community right here in Rochester. What happens with law enforcement in the Twin Cities is different than what happens down here in our part of the state a lot of times. So by passing some of these laws and the training, some of the things that are happening that have come out of George Floyd don't necessarily, it's not a one-size-fits-all type of situation. True. So our law enforcement's trying to deal with things that they're not faced with as much as like up in the metro.
Well, one thing you should know is that there are more deadly force encounters with police outside of the metro than inside of it. That is about 60% of the citizens or residents who get killed in connection with engaging law enforcement are in greater Minnesota. So it
Are
is
you
not an
sure about
urban
that?
problem.
Because
It
it's
is a statewide problem. It is
Help.
all of us.
Yeah.
Now you are right. You are right when you say not one size fits all.
Yeah.
Because what our rural police chiefs told us is like, look, yeah, training is fine, but if I have a department with 3 officers and you have one of them out all week doing training, we can barely survive if that's what we have to do. And then, but in an urban department where they have several hundred officers, like in Minneapolis, you can make up and back up easier. We have to be sensitive to how a rural department is going to get their training needs met because they do carry an additional burden. Because, you know, if you take out 25% of the department with a 4-person department and you lose one to training, that is a substantial loss. Where in Minneapolis, you know, you can allow people to go do training and it's not, and you have other people who can back them up. So so you're right, it's not one size fits all. But I can tell you that there are a few things that we do agree on, whether you're in the most remote part of the state, small town, a big town like Rochester, or the biggest town like Minneapolis, you know, that we all want to see people survive. Even when people are guilty of crime, we would like them to be tried by a court. And we all agree that officers have an awful toll that is taken upon them mentally, emotionally, psychologically. One of the things that we worked on is officer wellness. Because if you go to a call where an older lady has been beaten up and mugged, then you go to a call where a child has been abused, then you go to a call where a teenager is laying dead on the floor, you know, how long? I mean, nobody can go through something like that unscathed. And if, you know, you start, and what do any of us do when we're getting overworked, overstressed, you lose patience, somebody says the wrong thing to you, maybe you don't react the best way. So it is important to deal with and be sensitive to the officer's needs as well. We recognize that, and that is something we heard from the biggest department to the smallest.
Do you ever worry about the law enforcement having such a hard time, and it's harder now, recruiting and retaining the officers that they have? I know a lot of people in the Twin Cities, either St. Paul or the Minneapolis forces, they've lost officers as well, and crime in the Twin Cities has gone up quite a bit this year.
Well, you know, it's not an easy profession. I mean, it takes a special person to be a good police officer. And, you know, one of the things we've got to do is create circumstances when people who are not cut out for policing will be quickly routed out of policing, so that the people who really should choose policing can do that work and can do it alongside colleagues who also should be doing that work. So, yeah, this issue of job stress, these things are important. It is important for the chief to be able to lead the department, to pick his or her team. Sometimes we did find that there are times when collective bargaining agreements requiring arbitration undermine the chief's ability to pick the team that the chief wants to have in the department. We found that this is a complicated thing. Coming up with good, modern 21st century policing that is affirming to the officers, respectful of the human rights of the citizens, it's not a simple thing, which is why we had a very diverse group come up with these recommendations. And we're very pleased with the outcome. And we're not done. We're going to keep on working until we get where we're going, which is humane and effective law enforcement.
Well, I'll tell you what, I like to look at silver linings when we have awful situations. There is good that can come out of it. And what we have seen, is over the past year, while things have been so very difficult, we've had some very necessary conversations. And I am just hoping that it continues to get better.
With your help, thank you.
Thank you. Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, I so appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you, Betsy. See you soon.
All right.